Hello and welcome to the Spirit Vessel Conversation Series, Professionals' Perspectives in Deathcare. My name is Jessica Wirtz, the founder of Spirit Vessel, and we're so glad you're here with us today. The Professionals' Perspectives in Deathcare series is centered around conversations with professionals of all types in the death care and emotional wellness space. These conversations aim to help bring awareness, acceptance, and normalization to death and the grieving process. If you enjoy these conversations, please consider sharing them on your favorite social media platform. And be sure to sign up for our newsletter so that you'll be the first to know when a new conversation is released. With me today is my sister and Spirit Vessel co-founder, Amanda McClellan, and we are joined by our guest, Litsa Williams.
Litsa Williams is a licensed clinical social worker and co-founder of What's Your Grief, one of the country's largest online grief and bereavement support communities, accessed by nearly 8 million grieving individuals and professionals each year. What's Your Grief offers hundreds of free grief articles, creative expression initiatives, online courses, and workshops for grievers, all created by mental health professionals who have experienced personal loss. They offer a robust online professionals community for clinicians from around the world who specialize in grief or are looking to expand their grief practice competence, as well as an online community for grievers looking for creative approaches to grief coping. In addition to her MSW, Litsa also holds a master's degree in philosophy with a special interest in applied mental health ethics. She has worked in the field of unexpected and traumatic grief in Baltimore, Maryland for 13 years and has been interviewed as a grief expert for the New York Times, Washington Post, and NPR. She's the co-author of What's Your Grief? Lists to help you through any loss, available now for pre-order and set for release September 27th, 2022. Welcome, Litsa. We're so excited to have you and learn everything about all your work and all the fun and exciting things you guys are doing.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Had I known you were going to read the whole bio out loud, I would have edited it down and not sent such a full version.
We love it. We love it. So we'll dive right in. So tell us a little bit about your story and what brought you into your work. We just obviously heard a little bit about your background, so fill in the details for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably the place to start is that Eleanor, who's my co-founder, and we met when we were working together at an organization that supported people through usually traumatic and unexpected losses. We're based in Baltimore, and so a lot of people who had lost loved ones to homicide, suicide, overdoses, accidents, and strokes and heart attacks. So a lot of the work we were doing, we often describe it as like the opposite of hospice work. It was work with people who really didn't ever see this coming, and we're kind of looking for a lot of resources. And we're based in Baltimore, but we were serving people all over the state of Maryland, and that was really complicated for a lot of reasons. We couldn't necessarily do as much in person as we wanted, and a lot of the people who we were working with here in Baltimore had a hard time just being able to also access in-person resources just because of time and childcare and all the other things. And realistically, just not being that interested in things like therapy and support groups as kind of a traditional way to cope. Eleanor and I had both been through pretty significant personal losses ourselves. Both of us, I lost my dad when I was a teenager. She was in her early 20s and pregnant with her first child when her mom died. I then lost family members to substance use disorder, to overdose. And so we had kind of this personal, and that was sort of in the death space. And then we also had a lot in the non-death loss space that we had coped with personally, with relatives with traumatic brain injury and with addiction. And so we had not been, though both mental health professionals ourselves, I'm a grief therapist and her background's in counseling psychology, mine clinical social work, neither of us loved support groups as a way for coping with grief or therapy. And a lot of the tools that we had used ourselves were creative expression tools. We had done a lot personally with using writing and art and photography and a lot of kind of other tools for coping. So we, I think, really started What's Your Grief in a lot of ways, but trying to just fill a gap that we saw. We wanted to be able to provide something to clients who weren't necessarily interested in those traditional ways of seeking grief support. Also something that people could do at home that they didn't have to necessarily, they could do it at midnight when they had time, and not have to worry about all of the barriers that get in the way for other types of, other types of access to grief support. So we started really informally. We started writing, and we started kind of sharing some of the creative initiatives that had helped us, sharing some of our the things that we felt were most helpful in our training to help people who are grieving as well. And then it's just grown really in lots of ways over the years. I think we never really expected it to take on the kind of life of its own that it did, but it's been amazing. And we've been able to really expand all of the different areas with creative initiatives and providing people with support, but also professionals, because we just found so many professionals were struggling to find resources for education, tools that they could use with people who are grieving. So that piece has really grown a lot over the years.
That's amazing. One thing that really strikes me when I'm on Instagram a lot, and I follow your Instagram account, and also in looking at your website and all your resources, there really is a plethora of resources for people going through all different types of grief, which I think is so important. And literally so many different things someone could be going through, anything from divorce to loss to, loss of a job, anything. And Jess and I talk about that a lot, that grief can be so many different things. And I love that you guys have all of that on your website.
Oh yeah, we are definitely, I think, both big believers that, grief is our normal and natural response to loss. And that is all types of loss. And oftentimes people get really, they associate it so much with death that when they're going through those non-death losses, I think people will often feel like, I'm not allowed to call this grief. That gets reserved just for people who've experienced a bereavement. And so we've really, felt like it was important to create space to acknowledge the huge range of ambiguous and non-death losses that people cope with.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys, in working with all kinds of grief, so speaking specifically to grief around loss, we know that there's the very traditional, and you mentioned that you've worked with a lot of unexpected grief, unexpected loss. How do you feel that, what would be some changes in the industry that you'd love to see for families when they go through the traditional scenario of having a funeral and the family goes through that whole process? Is there anything that you wish could be different, or that you work on, or that, in a perfect world, I guess?
Yeah, I think one of the things that so interestingly, the work that Eleanor and I, where we met, the work we were doing, we actually worked with people in the hospital. So starting at the time of their loved one's death, and then 2 years to follow. And so one of the things that was really amazing about that is that we were there often when they were being notified of their loved one's death. And then we were there 2 years later to hear them be able to reflect back on the decisions they made and where they went with sort of their planning that happened afterwards. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is, memory is a complicated thing. And there are a lot of things that we would, be able to hear people reflect back and know that some of their memories were really, really, really accurate. Some of their memories were kind of a little bit distorted about what had been going on at the time. But I think the biggest theme was that oftentimes people feel so rushed in that moment of having lost someone and needing to make decisions about what will happen next. And I think we felt like it was so important then to try to, unless there was a religious or spiritual constraint that had a time frame that was important, to help people to really slow down, because these losses were unexpected. Oftentimes people, even more so than when it was an anticipated loss, were in that absolute state of acute stress response where it was just barely processing some of the things that were happening. And what we found was that a lot of decisions that were being made, people would look back later and be like, gosh, I don't even remember how we chose that funeral home. Like, I don't even remember how we made these decisions, because it was such a blur during that time. And so we would often do a lot of work with families just to kind of say, we can take a deep breath here, right? Like, we can slow this down. There's no rush unless there's a rush, unless there's these other constraints. And I think that recently, one of the things I've thought about a lot with COVID is hoping that that's actually been a little bit of a benefit to maybe the way the industry in some ways thinks about kind of what happens immediately. So many people have waited a lot longer, not even just days, weeks, but months, years, to be able to kind of plan what comes next and plan how they want to honor their loved one. And so that, I think, is something that we feel like is really helpful and really important to people when they look back on things. We know that we've heard that feedback so much of feeling rushed. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Jess, we talk about that all the time, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that just the need for these types of conversations to be happening prior to, a loss in your life, and just the understanding of how this is so normal to experience it, just kind of prime yourself in the conversation of it, and really just being able to walk through life with some sort of relationship to your grief already, instead of being like, stay away, go away, I don't need you, I don't want you. It's like having that conversation, bringing grief in almost as like a companion and saying, you're going to walk with me for my life in different varying degrees.
Sure.
Let me start having conversations now around the losses that I'll feel in my life. And yeah, I think that's so true what you're saying. And it's something Amanda and I do talk about too. It's like, there aren't many benefits out of COVID, but I would say that the one you just said is probably one of the most. It's really allowing people to start realizing, this isn't an end of life conversation. This is a now conversation. And what I love so much about what you're doing is that you create the community and the support groups and just the resources and the education for people to come in now. Like, they don't have to wait until they've had a loss. So can you talk about some of the resources that you provide on your website and some of the community that you offer people when they come there?
Yeah, sure. So I think what we really like to think about, and the way that we create and think about resources, is just that people have so many different coping styles and different approaches. And I think it's oversimplifying to use these three categories, but I will anyway, because it's a lot of how we conceptualize the support we provide. That, we think that there are people who really are kind of lean towards that emotional piece of connecting with loss. And I think obviously in the field as professionals, we call that intuitive grievers, but I think most people, when they identify with it, it's just more of thinking of grief as an emotional experience, and thinking of what we need in terms of supporting our grief is that people are looking for ways to connect with those emotions. And then we think that they're the people who lean much more kind of rational and cognitive in their approach. In the field, obviously, they call these instrumental grievers, but I think a lot of people don't know that term. And I think it is just helping people to understand that there are a huge number of people who the way that they process their grief is much more about thoughts rather than feelings. It's much more about physical action, kind of wanting to be active, and that feels important to them. And oftentimes there's an interest in learning more about grief and kind of doing a lot more hands-on things. And so we're always looking at that. And then creative, which kind of, I think, bridges between the two, where we have people where those creative outlets are really, really important to either direction. So a lot of what we try to create are things that really support those different areas, rather than focusing so much on what type of loss people are experiencing. And I think that for us is, a lot of times you go places and it's like, we're for suicide loss, we're for overdose, we're for people who've lost a partner or a child. And I think those spaces are really important for people who are seeking those sorts of connections. What we really try to create is something that's a little bit different. We try to think a little bit more about, no matter what type of your loss, no matter the relationship, the way someone died, or if it's a non-death loss, what of those areas are you trying to access in terms of, and what do you need in terms of your support? So from the kind of rational side or that instrumental side, we provide a lot of education about just understanding grief for those people who are just like, I want to know about all the grief theories. I want to understand all of what all of the mental health research is. Like, I want to kind of understand myself in these ways. We try to create space for that. We try to create a lot of space that does talk about how grief isn't just an emotional experience, but helping people to understand their own thoughts. And so even in things like our journaling courses, or in some of the workshops that we offer that are around things that people will think on the surface are more emotional experiences, we really try to help people to see what that more cognitive side of things is. And so for some people, we know that there are, the courses, they'll find that really helpful of like, I just want to learn all the things I can learn. And with people who are really interested in more of that emotional space, that's where we'll try to create a lot of opportunities for people to connect with each other, or to be able to really share and process those emotional, those emotional experiences they're having. We do that through a lot of the creative that bridges the two. We offer photography, exploring grief through photography courses, writing courses. We have through our site, you can kind of get to a sub-site, which is called Grief in 6 Words, where we just encourage people to kind of engage with this little mini writing prompts of using 6-word stories as a way to explore grief, which we find people who are more rational, like, really love that it's so small and bite size, and that people who are emotional, a little bit more emotional, are often like, it's been really helpful for me to kind of condense this down. I'm somebody who usually writes and writes and writes, or talks and talks and talks, and it's really helped me to kind of focus on those things. So we use that. We have webinars that we offer that are both live and recorded. And then we do a lot of challenges on social media and groups that we will run periodically. We don't run ongoing groups. And people will reach out and say, do you offer support groups? We feel like there's so many support groups out there. And as I described before, like, we really were founded on the idea of creating, our tagline is, grief support for the rest of us, like, kind of people where that model wasn't working or wasn't what people were looking for. So a lot of what we do is more of that workshop model, course model, connecting on social model, for people. And then we direct people to a lot of support groups because there's so many amazing groups that are already out there.
Oh, so good. Thanks for breaking that down. I think that you just totally taught me something that I wasn't aware of before, which was really just the learning styles of how we do learn about grief. Because I think that when you are from one perspective and you are from one learning style, it takes them, you have to stop and be like, oh, wait, other people learn other ways. That's not true for everyone else. And so the fact that you are teaching and talking to this very wide spectrum is just really fabulous. What a gamut to be able to offer from. I think that what you're saying to me, and just something that I'm so interested in as well, is just being able to help people access that creative place in themselves so that something can come out, because something will always come out of all of us, no matter what your learning style is, like just prompting. And so just giving people that place to start from is just so intelligent.
Yeah, and I think helping people to realize that so many things that they don't realize are grief coping, that I think there's a lot. And one of these, when they did this research that really identified intuitive and instrumental grievers, and when they really started to explore that, they realized a lot of things, but one of them was that our society really privileges intuitive grievers, and this idea that grief is an emotional experience and that we need to talk about it and write about it, and that's kind of what grief, to be doing grief right, that's what we need to be doing. And what we've of course learned in all this research is that that's not true. Like, in cognitively processing it is absolutely just as healthy and just as normal. We don't have to talk about our grief in order to process it. Freud kind of made that up and people jumped on the bandwagon, and there's not a lot of research that backs that up. We do need to make sure we're not avoiding it. And it's easier to kind of avoid if we're not, necessarily processing it through letting it out. But that's where I think a lot of those creative spaces become so useful for instrumental grievers, who will often find that they really just get into something that feels not even consciously connected with their grief, but some sort of like really physical new project that they take on. They suddenly want to like build something out, in their yard, or like do something. And oftentimes, once you start to kind of talk to people about that, they realize that this is something that is coming out for in different ways or for different reasons connected to their grief, and that giving a space to help people to see and make those connections and be able to kind of figure out why certain things are coming out the way they are, I think is incredibly, incredibly valuable. And we hear from people all the time that it's really normalizing and validating to realize, okay, it doesn't always look like just, journaling or something very traditional. It comes out in all these different ways.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more with that. I find it just, so incredibly helpful to use creative expression, because I just feel like no matter what, it is the expression of grief coming out of your body. And there does need to be an outlet for that.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to move it. It's just literally the moving, whether it's talk therapy or whether it's action. And
Yeah.
Great. So segueing a little bit here, because I'm really curious to hear, just really based off of Amanda and I's work with Spirit Vessel, we work a lot with individuals and communities in helping to bring ritual and ceremony back in. So really giving a grounding spot, a really like solid ground for people just to come to and say, these are my practices. This is the way I move through things. This is the way I get through a day.
Mm-hmm.
I hear a lot of your work around, the courses that you do and the community that you build would most likely have ritual and ceremony built in some way. But can you talk a little bit more about that in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've really focused on in different ways is the role of individual and private ritual. I think one of the things that we found in a lot of what existed in the grief space was a lot of support for the traditional memorial rituals, thinking about collective rituals, thinking about spiritually based rituals, and that we felt like in wonderful ways that it was great to be able to see how that existed. But we were also, where we felt like there wasn't as much support for people, was figuring out, what does personal ritual look like? What does it mean for us to think about individual everyday ritual? And as I'm sure you all know, since you're into this, that the research that they've done around ritual and grief is that personal and private rituals are incredibly helpful for people when they identify what helps them to ease some of their own harder grief emotions, or the things that feel more distressing, is that oftentimes it's those personal everyday rituals that are really useful. So we, one of the things that we really love to do when we think about ritual and create spaces for it in some of these different areas, is to help people to know that one of the beauties of ritual is that there's not a checklist. It's not prescriptive. It's not that there's kind of a magic right way to do ritual. Part of it is starting to figure out, what have people been leaning towards that have felt meaningful in their own. And that oftentimes certain things do start to emerge for people that are a little bit naturally kind of in that ritual, that are leaning towards that comforting ritual. And our experience is that many times people feel weird about those things. Like they feel like they're things that they don't want to talk about, or it's like abnormal, or it's that they shouldn't be doing it. Weird they're doing something. It's like weird that I'm like every single morning I'm drinking out of my late husband's coffee cup. Like that's an indication that maybe I'm not moving forward, rather than being able to say like, no, that you're creating your own ritualized space for something daily where you're creating what is working for you. And so that's a lot of the space that we've spent time, I think, trying to help people to say, where are you leaning naturally that may kind of fall into an umbrella of ritual? How are you feeling about that? Like, do you have self-judgment that's coming up around it? And then how are you creating space, even if even if it is going to stay something that is kind of personal and individual, that within families that it can be really helpful to kind of know what everyone else's kind of little meaningful rituals are. So we've spent a lot more time, I think, in that space with people than in some of the more collective ritual spaces, largely because we felt like other people were already doing that pretty well. And also, I think because for us, individual ritual had been personally really useful for us. And so that's been a lot of our leaning with folks.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautifully said too. I just totally agree. I feel like so much of it is just allowing people to have permission to do what they need to do. Like there is no right or wrong. It's like, just know that whatever you're doing is the way that you move in the world. It's the way you walk through things individually. And it's absolutely not prescriptive that way.
Yeah, and then it's flexible and that it'll continue evolving, right? Like that the ritual that feels meaningful to you in the 6 months after someone dies might not be the same ritual that feels meaningful in the 6 years after someone dies. And that, I think one of the things that we do see sometimes people struggle with is when they create something either individually or collectively, and then it doesn't feel right anymore. That then it feels like a betrayal of their loved one. Like, no, we created this ongoing ritual. We created something that was going to be daily or yearly or, something that felt meaningful in this way. And now we can't abandon it. That would be wrong. And being able to say like, no, we continue to move through the world and evolve and grow and change, and ritual will do that right along with us. And that's the really beautiful thing about it, is that if we can not get too attached to it, we can let it shift.
Yes, absolutely. And before you said the second part, I was just like, that is the creative, natural way of the universe. It's just really letting things move through you and flow through you and creating again and again and again from that same place and understanding the natural evolution of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we love talking with you. And I just want to shift once more here because I'm really excited to know in your work, just what inspires you right now regarding the direction of your work or any other projects that you happen to be working on.
Oh, that's a good question. I think that's a really good question. We've had a really strange, I think, year because we have always existed in the online space, and we ended up in that way that COVID, I think, shifted the direction of lots of people. We ended up writing this book that we never planned to write, and it's been something that has made me feel a little bit more disconnected from some of the things that I usually get energy from and feel inspired by. And so I have been thinking, I want to get the book out of the way. Like I want it to be out. I want to have to not think about it anymore, because I think that will open up space again for some of the other things that I feel more connected with and connected to. But I think one of the things that probably right now I'm the most excited about or feeling the most inspired by is really refocusing locally here in Baltimore, because a lot of the things that we have done have grown online in wonderful ways that mean we reach people all over the world, and that the book, obviously the intention is for it to reach people anywhere, that I have felt less connected to the city that we just both love so much, and that is just a city that is filled with so much grief, but so much community and connection and art and growth and just so much that has come out of that. And so we're working on a project connecting with other groups, mostly people who, it's a lot of moms who've lost kids to gun violence and who have informally started support groups and advocacy groups and church groups and just like sort of different things all over the city, some connected with each other and some really separately. And we've been working on trying to kind of bring people together to have everyone who's doing kind of these grief and advocacy and violence related projects to be meeting more regularly, to be able to figure out how to support one another, to be able to, if we can offer training that would be helpful for people. We hear a lot of feedback that people start an informal support group and then realize like, wow, this is a lot. Like it's more than just bringing people together into a room. And so thinking about what we can do as the world is opening back up again to kind of support what's happening right here in Baltimore feels exciting for me and kind of what I'm feeling energized by.
Yeah, I love it. I also just so love the human nature is that it wants to collaborate and it wants to offer support and be supported and, you know, just feel witnessed in this. So we will naturally gravitate towards others to get this. And
yeah,
it's really amazing though, that you're bringing another level, which is your expertise on top of this to really help organize as well. And yeah, keep it intact for everyone.
Yeah.
So really beautiful visions. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else you'd like to share with our audience today, or just a little bit more about your work before we begin to close out and let people know how to contact you?
Well, no, but I would love to hear the answer to that question from the two of you. Like, what are you excited about and doing and coming next?
Sure. Yeah. Amanda and I have been working really diligently on this spirit vessel project of ours that we're just like so in love with, which ironically was all post-pandemic as well, even though the timing of it kind of like lines up. So I just feel like there's a need to say that now with these companies that have like formed out of the pandemic. But really, it was always the idea to bring back a really connective, intimate, personalized way of holding space for families and individuals who just need more out of the process of losing a loved one, who just need more space to share and express. And a lot of that is somatic expression as well. And so we've really been working on a package for that over a number of years. We've separated out the urns, so we now have the urns, they're individually packaged. We also have the book that is really like, that is the template to help one create their own personalized ceremony. So we're really just like starting to see how we can parse out all of the ideas that we had into this one package and share them out individually, because we love the idea of educating. We love the idea of ceremony and just having ritualized products as well to offer.
Yeah.
We've been really excited about this interview series we're offering. We just have like 100 ideas on the back burner that we're like, okay, you can only do one at a time, right? Like, or but
I know that feeling very, very well.
I'm sure you do. Yeah, so we're just excited to go one at a time on them and just get to know the community and really be able to, you know, find our community within this and find ways that we can really get our product out into the world, because we know how much it's needed. You know, it's just really finding your people and allowing them to find you. So what about you, Amanda? What's your most exciting aspect of our work right now together?
Yes, I second everything you say. I'm so excited about this interview series because, like Jess said, we're really in that place of, we know we have a wonderful offering, and it's just finding the individuals who are really interested in it and also figuring out what additional supportive offerings we can create to help our community even more. And I think we embarked on this interview series to get to know people, to collaborate, to hear all the wonderful, incredible things that all of our speakers are doing, and just get the word out about what we're doing in hopes of finding those people and fine tuning the services that we can provide for them. So yeah.
Yay. Yeah, I'd also offer Another thing I'm really excited about, actually two more things, which is
Keep going.
I know they just keep coming. Who's interviewing who? Really the idea of being able to offer retreats in space, like in physical retreats for people to somatically process grief. So it's actually something that I've begun organizing and bringing a group of facilitators together who are all professionals in their own right. And then we can have small groups come in and really be able to have this experience of working with their grief and different creative outlets, really. So that's my background as an artist coming into, but that feels very exciting just to be able to like put this idea outside of the online presence and into a physical form where people can really get benefit from it too.
Yeah, I know. I love that. And I think, I imagine that'll probably grow on its own in different ways. But I think also like before, thinking about this, and I don't know if you all are already doing something with this, but we think a lot about just that pre-loss space of like caregiving and when people are sick. And I think, it's interesting because I think we always lament that there's, there could be more in the grief support world, but really like in the post-loss world, I'm grateful about how much there is. And what we hear so much is, I think that pre-loss for people of really not even being able to create space to think about what can be meaningful in those death rituals. And I think hospices really do an amazing job of trying to do that, but they have so many things on their plate that it's hard. Like, I imagine there's just so many spaces that you could go with that. That's really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of think of it is very broad. You're right. And then even more specifically, like how do you support the person who is grieving for the loss they're going to have? And maybe they're the caregiver or they're not the one who's able to receive what they need to. So like, how do you support that person? Like, I want that person to have everything they can to work through this experience because it's so heavy for them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anticipatory grief is, I think that there's so much with anticipatory grief that's hard because there's guilt that's associated with it. People feel badly that they're going through the experience. And there's so much work of normalizing that anticipatory grief is what we do before someone dies. Like, we are grieving before someone's gone. And that is such a normal and natural part of grief. But it's hard, I think, when people are in that moment to give themselves permission to say, this is this part of this is what pre-grieving, or pre-loss, pre-death grieving is all about. And so I do think that, being able to help to support people in that is so important, because on their own, that pull is sometimes there, but people don't know what to do with it. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been so wonderful to talk to you. And I just want to let people know everywhere they can find you or learn more about your work. So what would you tell people?
sure, yeah. Whatsyourgrief.com is the easiest place to find us. And from there, you can find us on social. We're at What's Your Grief pretty much everywhere, on all the social platforms. Most of the social platforms. So that's usually the best way. And if anybody has specific questions and wants to email me, it's just Litsa@whatsyourgrief.com.
Thanks, Litsa. This has been wonderful to chat with you today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. As a reminder to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's conversation, please share it on your favorite social media platform and be sure to sign up for our newsletter at spiritvessel.com/newsletter so that you are among the first to be notified when a new conversation comes out. Thanks again.